My daughter said, "Just sign everything, it's easier." So I signed a donation letter in her honor. My hand didn't even hesitate when I put pen to paper. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, just leave a like and subscribe. It'll help me keep sharing these stories that need to be heard. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of my Chicago apartment, casting delicate shadows across the mahogany dining table where I sat with a stack of papers before me. My arthritic fingers traced the edges of each document while Sarah, my 42-year-old daughter, paced behind me in her designer heels, the ones I'd helped her buy for her promotion last year. "Mom, it's really straightforward," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone she'd perfected over the years. Sweet but impatient, loving but conditional. "The lawyers said it's just easier if everything's in my name. You know how complicated these things get when you're not around anymore." I looked up at her, studying the face I'd kissed countless times, the cheeks I'd wiped tears from, the mouth I'd fed when she was too sick to eat. She was beautiful, successful, everything I'd dreamed she'd become. Her honey blonde hair was styled in that expensive way that required weekly salon visits, and her navy blazer probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 2 months. The papers spread before me were legal documents transferring ownership of the lakeside cabin in Oregon, the last piece of property Harold and I had bought together before his heart attack took him from me 3 years ago. We'd planned to retire there, to sit on the dock with our coffee and watch the sunrise paint the water gold. Instead, I'd been visiting alone, sometimes talking to his ghost in the silence of those pine-scented mornings. "Sarah, sweetheart," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, "are you sure this is what's best? Your father and I—" "Mom." She knelt beside my chair, taking my weathered hands in her manicured ones. Her wedding ring, the one I'd helped pay for, caught the light. "Dad's been gone for 3 years. You're 73. What if something happens to you? What if you get sick and can't manage the property? We've talked about this. Michael and I will take care of everything. The kids will have a place to make memories. Isn't that what you want?" Her eyes were earnest, pleading, the same blue eyes that had looked up at me when she was 7 and asked if I'd buy her the bike in the store window. The same eyes that had filled with tears when she'd called me at midnight, sobbing about her divorce papers. The same eyes that had sparkled when she'd announced her engagement to Michael, her second husband, the one who barely acknowledged my presence at family gatherings. I thought about Emma and Jake, my grandchildren, now 15 and 12. They used to beg me to take them to the cabin, to teach them how to skip stones and identify different types of birds. But lately, they seemed more interested in their phones than in spending time with Grandma. When was the last time one of them had called me just to talk? The cabin held 40 years of memories. Harold teaching Sarah to fish from the dock, birthday parties with homemade cake and sparklers, Christmas mornings with presents stacked under a tree Harold had cut himself, the guest room where Sarah had hidden when she was scared during thunderstorms, and where I'd held her through her first heartbreak. "The lawyers say if we do this now, there won't be any tax complications later," Sarah continued, her thumb stroking my knuckles in that absent way she'd done since childhood. "And honestly, Mom, wouldn't it be nice not to worry about the upkeep? The property taxes? The insurance? You could just relax. Focus on yourself for once. Focus on myself." The words felt foreign. For 73 years, I'd focused on everyone else. First my parents, then Harold, then Sarah, and now the grandchildren. When had I ever put myself first? "What about my things there?" I asked, thinking of the photo albums I'd stored in the bedroom closet, the quilts my mother had made that I'd displayed on the beds, Harold's fishing gear still hanging in the shed. "We'll take care of everything, Mom. I promise. We'll keep the important stuff safe." She stood and walked to the window, gazing out at Lake Michigan in the distance. "Michael thinks we should renovate it. Maybe add a deck. The kids are getting older. They need space to bring friends. And honestly, some of that furniture is so dated. The antique rocking chair where I'd nursed Sarah through pneumonia when she was 8. The kitchen table Harold had built with his own hands. The bedroom set we'd saved for months to buy when we were newlyweds with more dreams than money. I picked up the pen, a simple blue ballpoint from the bank, and stared at the signature line, Ellen Margaret Richardson. The name felt heavy with history, with choices made and unmade, with a lifetime of giving and receiving and giving again. "You're sure this is what you want?" I asked one more time. Sarah turned from the window, her smile radiant. "Mom, it's what's best for everyone. Trust me. Trust me." How many times had she said those words? When she'd needed money for college textbooks that turned out to be for a spring break trip. When she'd asked me to co-sign for her first car, then defaulted on the payments. When she'd needed help with the down payment on her house, promising she'd pay me back once Michael's business took off. I signed my name with careful strokes, each letter a small goodbye to the woman who'd built that life with Harold. The woman who'd thought she'd have somewhere to go when she needed to remember who she used to be. "Thank you, Mom." Sarah leaned down and kissed my forehead, her perfume, something expensive I'd given her for Christmas, enveloping me in its floral embrace. "You won't regret this, I promise." But as I watched her gather the papers with eager efficiency, I felt something shift inside me, like a door closing that I hadn't realized was still open. The lakeside cabin wasn't just property to be transferred. It was the last piece of Harold, the last place where I could sit with our shared memories and feel like I still belonged somewhere. I made coffee in my small kitchen while Sarah called her lawyer, confirming the documents were signed. Through the thin walls, I could hear her voice change as she spoke to someone else. Probably Michael. "Yes, it's done," she said. "Mom signed everything. We can start the renovations next month." Renovations. As if the life Harold and I had built there was something that needed to be erased, painted over, replaced with something more suitable for the family I'd apparently graduated out of. That evening, after Sarah had left with promises to call soon, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. The apartment felt smaller somehow, quieter. The framed photos on the mantel, Sarah's graduation, her wedding, the grandchildren's school pictures, seemed to stare back at me with familiar faces that now felt like strangers. I'd signed away the last piece of my history with Harold, the last place that had been truly ours. And for what? For the promise that my daughter would take care of everything, that I could focus on myself for once. But what was left of myself to focus on? Who was Ellen Richardson without the roles she'd spent decades perfecting? Wife, mother, grandmother, provider, problem solver, safety net? The phone rang. For a moment, my heart lifted, thinking maybe Sarah was calling to check on me, to ask how I was feeling about the decision. Instead, it was a recorded message about my car warranty expiring. I hung up and returned to my cold tea, to the silence that had become my most constant companion, to the growing realization that I'd just signed away more than property. I'd signed away the last piece of proof that Ellen Margaret Richardson had ever existed as more than just a signature on someone else's dreams. The next morning, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I opened the old wooden filing cabinet in my bedroom closet, the one Harold had bought at a garage sale 30 years ago. My hands trembled as I pulled out folder after folder, each one containing receipts, bank statements, and copies of checks I'd written over the decades. I'd always been meticulous with records. Harold used to tease me about it. "Ellen, you keep track of every penny like the IRS is coming for dinner," he'd say, kissing my cheek as I balanced our checkbook at the kitchen table. But now, looking at these papers, I realized they told a story I'd never allowed myself to read completely. The first folder was labeled Sarah College Years. Inside were receipts for tuition payments, dorm fees, textbooks, meal plans, but also unexpected expenses. Emergency room visits when she'd gotten food poisoning from questionable sushi, car repairs when she'd insisted she needed a car for her internship, spring break trips that she'd convinced me were educational opportunities. I pulled out a letter I'd written to the financial aid office, pleading for an extension on a payment. My handwriting looked younger then, more hopeful. "My daughter is an excellent student," I'd written. "She just needs this opportunity to succeed. I'm willing to take on additional work hours to ensure her education continues uninterrupted." Additional work hours. I'd taken a second job cleaning office buildings downtown, mopping floors and emptying trash cans from 6 p.m. to midnight, then coming home to my regular job at the insurance company the next morning. For 3 years, I'd survived on 4 hours of sleep, so Sarah could graduate debt-free. She'd hugged me at graduation, tears in her eyes. Mom, I'll never forget what you sacrificed for me. I'm going to make you so proud. The next folder made my chest tighten. Sarah, first marriage crisis. When her first husband, David, had left her for his secretary, Sarah had been devastated. 8 months pregnant with Emma, no job, no savings of her own. She'd moved back into my apartment, sleeping in her childhood bedroom while I converted Harold's den into a nursery. I remembered the nights I'd walked the floors with baby Emma, trying to soothe her colic while Sarah slept, exhausted from crying. I'd taken early retirement from the insurance company. 43 years of service ended abruptly, so I could provide childcare while Sarah went back to school for her MBA. Just until I get back on my feet, Mom, she'd promised. 2 years, maybe less. Then Emma and I will find our own place, and I'll pay you back for everything. Those 2 years became 4. By the time Sarah met Michael and moved out, Emma was calling me Mama Ellen and asking why she couldn't stay with me instead of going to the new house with the man she didn't know. I found the receipt for Emma's bedroom furniture, $2,047 for a crib, changing table, and dresser set that Sarah had insisted Emma needed. She's your granddaughter, Mom. Don't you want her to have nice things? Of course I did. I'd wanted Emma to have everything I couldn't give Sarah when she was little. So I'd used the small inheritance from my mother's estate, money I'd planned to use for home repairs. Harold and I had been postponing for years. The wedding Sarah and Michael folder was thick with receipts. The engagement party I'd hosted in my apartment for 60 people. The bridal shower at the country club that cost more than my monthly rent. The wedding dress, $3,200 for something she'd wear once, but, Mom, it's my dream dress. Please. This is the only wedding I'll ever have. It wasn't, as it turned out. There was also a wedding second ceremony folder for when she and Michael had renewed their vows in Hawaii 2 years later. They'd wanted the whole family there, but somehow only I was expected to pay for airfare and accommodations. I pulled out a photograph from that trip. Sarah and Michael on the beach, looking radiant and young. I was in the background, holding Jake while he cried, my face tired and sunburned from chasing him around the resort pool, while his parents enjoyed couples massages I'd also paid for. The pattern became clearer as I moved through the folders. Emergency car repair, Sarah. Down payment help, Sarah's house. Medical bills, Jake's ear surgery. Private school tuition, Emma and Jake. Family vacation, Disney World. Michael's business loan co-signature. Each folder contained my careful documentation of money given freely, lovingly, without question, but also my own sacrifices, carefully hidden from everyone, including myself. The vacation Harold and I had canceled to pay for Sarah's car. The medical procedure I'd postponed because Sarah needed help with her mortgage. The clothes I'd worn until they fell apart because the grandchildren needed new school uniforms. I found a bank statement from 6 years ago, after Harold's funeral. My savings account showed a balance of $127,000. His life insurance policy, his retirement accounts, the money we'd been saving for our golden years together. That number had seemed like security then, like Harold's final gift to ensure I'd be comfortable in my old age. The most recent statement from last month showed 4,192s. Where had it all gone? I traced through the withdrawals, each one connected to a phone call, a text message, a family emergency that only I could solve. Jake's summer camp when Michael's business was temporarily tight. Emma's sweet 16 party when Sarah wanted to give her memories that would last a lifetime. The family cruise last Christmas that I couldn't afford to join, but somehow could afford to pay for. At the bottom of the last folder, I found something that made my breath catch. A small spiral notebook, its pages yellowed with age. Harold's handwriting filled the first page. Ellen's dreams, he'd written at the top. Below that, a list in his careful script. See the Northern Lights in Alaska. Take a cooking class in Tuscany. Visit the Shakespeare Festival in Stratford. Learn to paint watercolors. Write letters to her future great-grandchildren. Buy that antique rocking chair at Miller's Antique Shop. Renovate the cabin's kitchen with the blue tiles she loves. Plant a rose garden like her mother's. I'd forgotten about this list. Harold had made it during one of our late-night conversations about retirement, when we dreamed about having time for ourselves, for each other, for the parts of life we'd postponed while raising Sarah and building our careers. None of it had happened. After Harold died, every plan had been reshuffled around Sarah's needs, the grandchildren's activities, the endless series of small crises that required my immediate financial attention. I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by the archaeology of my generosity, and tried to remember the last time someone in my family had asked about my dreams. When had anyone wondered what I wanted, what I needed, what would make me happy? The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Sarah's name appeared on the caller ID. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice bright with the particular cheerfulness that usually preceded a request. "I hope I'm not bothering you. I know you're probably busy. Busy. Doing what?" Sitting alone in my apartment, discovering how thoroughly I'd erased myself in service to everyone else's happiness. "I'm here, sweetheart," I said, my voice automatically warm and available. "So, Michael and I were talking, and we realized we never properly thanked you for signing over the cabin. We want to do something special. We're planning a family weekend there next month. Our first time using it as the new owners. Isn't that exciting?" My heart began to race. "Oh, that sounds lovely. The thing is, we want to make some improvements before then. You know how that old kitchen is. Those cabinets are practically falling apart. And the bathroom really needs updating. We found this amazing contractor who can do it all, but..." Her voice trailed off in that familiar way. I closed my eyes. "How much, Sarah?" "It's not that much, really, considering what it'll add to the property value. 28,000. But Mom, when you see what they do with the place, you'll be so proud. It'll finally look like something from those home and garden magazines. $28,000. More than half of what remained in my savings account. Money I needed for my own uncertain future, for medical bills and living expenses, and the 1,000 small emergencies that came with aging. Sarah, I began, then stopped. In my hand, I still held Harold's list of my dreams, written in his loving script, evidence of a woman who had once wanted things for herself. "Mom? Are you there?" I looked around my bedroom, at the furniture Harold and I had bought piece by piece over 40 years of marriage, at the wedding photo where we looked impossibly young and hopeful, at the window where morning light revealed how small my world had become. "I'm here," I said softly. "So, can you help us out? I promise this is the last time. Once the cabin is renovated, it'll be perfect. We won't need anything else. The last time." How many times had I heard those words? How many promises that this sacrifice would be the final one? That after this, I could focus on myself, rest, enjoy what remained of my life? Was I used? The question formed in my mind like smoke, wisping around the edges of my consciousness, demanding acknowledgement. "Let me think about it," I heard myself say. There was a pause. Sarah wasn't used to that response. "Okay," she said slowly. "But Mom, we really need to move quickly on this. The contractor is in high demand." After I hung up, I sat in the gathering dusk of my bedroom, Harold's list still in my hands. Outside my window, Chicago's evening lights began to twinkle. Millions of people going about their lives, pursuing their dreams, protecting their futures. I thought about the blue tiles Harold had mentioned, the ones I'd fallen in love with at a home show 15 years ago. We'd planned to install them in the cabin kitchen during our retirement, a small luxury to mark our golden years together. Now someone else would choose the tiles. Someone else would decide what our dream cabin should become. Was I used? The question wouldn't leave me alone. 3 days passed without me calling Sarah back about the renovation money. 3 days that felt like holding my breath underwater, waiting for something to break the surface. On Thursday morning, my neighbor Mrs. Chen knocked on my door. She was holding a plate of homemade cookies, her weathered face creased with concern. "Ellen, dear, I wanted to check on you. I noticed you haven't been getting your mail for a few days." I looked toward my mailbox and realized she was right. The small metal box was stuffed with envelopes, catalogs, and notices I'd been too distracted to collect. When had I stopped caring about such basic things? "I've been thinking," I told her, accepting the cookies with hands that felt disconnected from my body. Mrs. Chen studied my face with the sharp eyes of someone who'd lived through 8 decades of human behavior. "Sometimes thinking is the most dangerous thing we can do. and sometimes it's the only thing that can save us. After she left, I forced myself to retrieve the mail. Among the usual bills and advertisements was a cream-colored envelope with elegant script addressing. The return address made my stomach clench. The Morrison family, Sarah's neighbors, the ones whose daughter had married last spring in that lavish ceremony Sarah had talked about for months. Inside was an invitation to their son's graduation party. "Join us as we celebrate Timothy's acceptance to Northwestern University," it read. At the bottom, a handwritten note. "Ellen, we'd love to have you there. Timothy always mentions how kind you were to him when he was little." I remembered Timothy, a quiet boy who used to hide behind his mother's legs when they visited. I'd always made sure to have extra cookies when he came over, the kind with chocolate chips that made his eyes light up. When had I last seen him? When had anyone in my family mentioned what I meant to the children in our neighborhood? That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma, my 15-year-old granddaughter. "Grandma, can you send me $200 for homecoming dress? Mom said to ask you directly. No punctuation, no please. No how are you, Grandma. Just a demand, casual and confident, as if I were an ATM with unlimited funds and no feelings." I stared at the message for 20 minutes before typing back, "What kind of dress costs $200? Her response came immediately. "It's not that much, everyone spends way more. Mom said you always help with important stuff. Everyone spends way more." As if my fixed income could be compared to families with dual professional salaries. As if my financial limitations were irrelevant to their expectations. I didn't respond. For the first time in Emma's 15 years, I left her message hanging in digital silence. 2 hours later, Sarah called. "Mom, Emma is really upset. She says you're being weird about the dress money. What's going on?" I asked her what kind of dress cost $200. I said carefully, "Mom, it's homecoming. It's important to her. She wants to look nice. When I was her age, I made my own dress for the school dance. Cost $12 for the fabric." Sarah's laugh was sharp, dismissive. "Times are different now, Mom. Kids today have different expectations. Do you want your granddaughter to be embarrassed because her dress is cheap?" Cheap. The word hit me like a slap. Everything about my life, my apartment, my clothes, my careful budgeting, was apparently cheap to them. Not practical, not thoughtful, not the result of a lifetime of making every dollar count. Just cheap. "I'll think about it," I said. "Mom, the dance is Saturday. She needs to shop tomorrow." Then maybe she should have asked earlier. There was a pause. In that silence, I heard something shift between us, like a door closing. "Fine," Sarah said, her voice cold. "I'll figure it out myself." She hung up without saying goodbye. That evening, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, watching the local news. A story came on about a charity drive for seniors who couldn't afford their medications. The reporter interviewed an elderly woman who looked about my age, her eyes bright with gratitude as volunteers delivered groceries to her apartment. "People don't realize," the woman said, "how invisible you become when you get older, how easy it is to fall through the cracks." I turned off the television and sat in the darkness, listening to the sounds of my building settling around me. Through the thin walls, I could hear the Henderson family next door, parents helping their children with homework, someone practicing piano, the warm chaos of a family that seemed to enjoy each other's company. When had my family stopped enjoying mine? Friday morning brought a Facebook notification on my phone. Sarah had posted new photos from some event I hadn't been invited to, a barbecue at their house with Michael's colleagues. The pictures showed Emma in a beautiful blue dress, laughing with friends, looking radiant and happy. The dress was gorgeous. Probably cost more than $200. But what made my chest tight wasn't the dress. It was the caption, "Great party. So grateful for friends who are like family. Friends who are like family." While her actual family member, the one who'd raised her, sacrificed for her, loved her unconditionally, sat alone in a studio apartment, apparently not worth including or even mentioning. I scrolled through the comments. Dozens of people praising Sarah's hosting skills, complimenting Emma's dress, asking about the recipe for whatever dessert they'd served. Normal, warm interactions between people who seemed to genuinely care about each other. At the bottom, I found my own comment from 6 months ago on a different post. Beautiful family. Love you all. It had received no likes, no responses, not even a heart emoji from my own daughter. That's when I saw it, a comment thread I'd missed, buried among the dozens of responses to Sarah's party photos. Your mom must be so proud of Emma, someone had written. Sarah's response made my hands shake. Oh, you know how it is with older parents. She's getting a bit difficult lately. We're trying to be patient with her. Difficult. I read the word again, certain I'd misunderstood. Then I took a screenshot, because somehow making it permanent felt important. I was difficult because I'd hesitated to give Emma $200. Difficult because I'd asked questions about renovations that would consume half my remaining savings. Difficult because I dared to exist as something more than a silent source of financial support. I set the phone aside and walked to my bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was 73 years old, with silver hair and laugh lines earned through decades of finding joy in small things. Her eyes held intelligence, kindness, and a strength forged by surviving loss and hardship. This woman was not difficult. She was inconvenient to people who preferred her voiceless and generous. Saturday arrived gray and cold, matching my mood. I'd planned to clean my apartment, maybe read the novel I'd been trying to finish for months. Instead, I found myself putting on my best coat and taking the bus downtown to Michigan Avenue. I walked into the department store where Sarah had mentioned shopping for Emma's dress. The homecoming section was full of teenage girls with their mothers, all of them trying on gowns that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I watched a mother patiently hold dress after dress while her daughter preened in front of the mirror. "What do you think, Mom?" the girl asked, genuinely seeking her mother's opinion. "I think you look beautiful in anything," the mother replied. "But this one makes your eyes sparkle." They hugged, both of them glowing with shared happiness over this milestone moment. When had Emma last asked for my opinion about anything that mattered? When had she last hugged me without being prompted by her mother? I left the store and walked to the nearby coffee shop, ordering a cappuccino I couldn't really afford, and sitting by the window to watch the world go by. Families walked past, parents pushing strollers, grandparents holding small hands, teenagers linking arms with friends. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere, to someone. My phone buzzed. A text from Jake, my 12-year-old grandson. "Hey, Grandma. Mom said you might get me the new PlayStation for my birthday. Can you let me know soon so I can tell my friends? No. Please. No. How are you?" No acknowledgement that my birthday was next week and no one had mentioned it. Just another request, another assumption that Grandma's money was available for whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted it. I typed back, "When is my birthday, Jake?" 30 minutes passed. Then, "IDK Mom usually reminds me." I set the phone face down on the table and finished my cappuccino in silence. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in sick to my volunteer shift at the church food pantry. A lie. But I needed to stay home and think. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and began writing. At the top of the page, I wrote, "What I've given up." Below that, a growing list. Harold's and my retirement dreams, my health, delayed medical care to pay for others, my friendships, no money for social activities, my hobbies, sold my piano to help with Emma's braces, my independence, financial insecurity from constant giving, my voice, afraid to say no, afraid to be difficult, my identity, exist only as Mom, Grandma, never as Ellen. On the next page, what I've received in return. I stared at the blank paper for a long time. Finally, I wrote, "The privilege of being useful." That night, I lay in bed listening to the sirens and car horns of Chicago's Night Symphony, thinking about Mrs. Chen's words. Sometimes thinking was dangerous. Sometimes it was the only thing that could save us. I was beginning to understand which one this was. Sunday morning arrived with an aggressive knock on my apartment door. I knew that rhythm. Sharp, impatient, demanding immediate attention. Sarah. Through the peephole, I could see her pacing in the hallway, her phone pressed to her ear, gesturing animatedly at someone I couldn't see. She was wearing the cashmere coat I'd bought her for Christmas 2 years ago, the one that had cost me 3 months of careful budgeting. I opened the door. Mom? Finally. She pushed past me without being invited, her heels clicking against my hardwood floors like an accusation. We need to talk. Behind her, Michael followed with the resigned expression of a man who'd been dragged into someone else's drama. He nodded at me with his usual polite distance, the kind of acknowledgement you'd give a store clerk. Emma and Jake trailed behind, both of them glued to their phones, clearly uncomfortable with whatever confrontation was about to unfold in my living room. Kids, go wait in the car, Sarah instructed without looking at them. But Mom, it's cold, Jake started. Now. They left without saying hello to me, without even making eye contact. When had I become someone they were afraid to acknowledge? Sarah turned to face me, her expression a mixture of frustration and forced patience. She looked like someone preparing to deal with a misbehaving child. Mom, what's going on with you lately? Emma was in tears yesterday because you ignored her text about the dress. Jake thinks you don't love him anymore because you didn't answer his question about the PlayStation. And that whole thing about the cabin renovations. We've been waiting almost a week for an answer. I sat down in my favorite chair, the one Harold had surprised me with for our 20th anniversary. Its familiar embrace gave me courage. I've been thinking, I said quietly. Thinking about what? Michael spoke for the first time, his tone suggesting that my thinking was somehow an inconvenience to their schedule. I looked at him, this man who'd been part of my family for 8 years, but had never once asked about my day, my health, or my feelings, who accepted my financial help as casually as he accepted the weather. About whether I'm being used, I said. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire no one wanted to acknowledge. Sarah's laugh was sharp and brittle. Used? Mom, we're family. Families help each other. Do they? I asked. Because I've been looking at my records, and it seems like help only flows in one direction. Records? Michael's voice carried a hint of something. Anxiety? Anger? That I'd never heard before. I stood and walked to the dining table where I'd laid out my folders the night before. Months of bank statements, years of receipts, decades of evidence. In the past 5 years, I've given you $67,000, I said, reading from the summary I'd written in my careful script. That doesn't include gifts, groceries I've bought when you visited, or the cabin I just signed over. Sarah's face flushed. Mom, you're making it sound like we're criminals or something. We never asked you to keep track. No, you never asked me to do anything except give. I picked up another sheet of paper. When was the last time someone in this family called me just to see how I was doing? Not to ask for money, not to ask me to babysit, not to solve a problem, just to talk to me. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom, you're being ridiculous, Sarah said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. We care about you. We include you in everything. Do you? I walked to my phone and pulled up the Facebook photos from Friday night. You had a party yesterday. A big one from the looks of it. When was I invited? Michael shifted uncomfortably. Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. That was just a work thing. You wouldn't have enjoyed it. How do you know what I'd enjoy? When have you ever asked? Mom, you don't like crowds. I don't like being excluded. The words came out stronger than I'd intended. I don't like being treated like an ATM instead of a person. I don't like my granddaughter texting me demands for money like I'm a bank. And I really don't like being called difficult on social media when I dare to ask questions about how my life savings is being spent. Sarah's face went white. You saw that? I see everything, Sarah. I just haven't said anything about it because I was too afraid of being, what did you call it? Difficult. Michael stood up, his business-like demeanor finally cracking. Ellen, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. We've always been grateful for your help. We just thought you enjoyed being able to contribute to the family. Contribute to the family. As if I were an outsider trying to buy my way into their good graces. I've been contributing to this family for 42 years, I said. I contributed when I worked 3 jobs to put Sarah through college. I contributed when I took early retirement to babysit Emma so Sarah could get her MBA. I contributed my house down payment money for your wedding. I contributed Harold's life insurance for your business loan. I contributed the cabin Harold and I bought with our retirement dreams. My voice was rising, and I didn't care. 42 years of swallowed words were finally finding their way out. What I want to know is, what has this family contributed to me? When was the last time anyone asked what I needed? What I wanted? What would make me happy? Sarah began to cry. Not the real tears of genuine emotion, but the calculated tears of someone who'd learned that crying usually got her what she wanted. Mom, I can't believe you're saying these things. I love you. We all love you. Love isn't a word, Sarah. It's actions. And your actions tell me I'm only valuable when I'm useful. That's not true, she said. But her voice lacked conviction. Prove it. I sat back down, feeling suddenly exhausted but strangely liberated. Tell me something about my life that has nothing to do with how I can help you. Tell me about my dreams, my interests, my friends. Tell me what makes me happy. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Sarah whispered, I know you like to read. What do I like to read? More silence. I know you volunteer at the church. Why do I volunteer there? What do I do? Who are my friends there? She couldn't answer. In 42 years of being her mother, I had somehow become invisible as a person. I existed only as a function, the woman who solved their problems and funded their dreams. Michael cleared his throat. Ellen, I think we all need to take a step back here. Maybe there's been some miscommunication. There's been no communication at all, I interrupted. That's the problem. You communicate your needs to me and I respond. I've never communicated my needs to you because I was afraid you'd stop loving me. We'd never stop loving you, Sarah said quickly. But you'd stop visiting if I stopped giving, wouldn't you? The question hung in the air like a challenge none of them wanted to accept. Mom, that's not fair. When was the last time you visited me when you didn't need something? I asked. When was the last time Emma or Jake called me just to talk? When was the last time anyone in this family treated me like I mattered for reasons that had nothing to do with my bank account? Michael stood up abruptly. I think we should go. This conversation isn't productive. Sit down, Michael. My voice carried an authority I didn't know I still possessed. This conversation is 20 years overdue. He sat. The cabin renovations, I continued. $28,000. That's more than half of what I have left in the world. After Harold died, after 43 years of working, after a lifetime of careful saving, that money represents my security, my ability to pay for medical care, assisted living if I need it, a decent burial when I die. Sarah's tears were flowing freely now, but I couldn't tell if they were genuine or performative. But you want me to spend it on renovations for a property I no longer own, for a family that excludes me from their celebrations and calls me difficult when I ask questions. Mom, we'd pay you back. With what? I asked. You have 2 car payments, a mortgage, private school tuition, and a lifestyle that requires every penny you make. You've never paid me back for anything in your entire adult life. Why would this be different? Because we promise? Your promises aren't worth anything anymore, Sarah. The words hit her like a physical blow. She actually stepped backward. I won't be giving you money for the renovations, I said quietly. I won't be buying Jake a PlayStation. I won't be funding Emma's wardrobe or your family vacations or Michael's business ideas. What are you saying? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. I'm saying the ATM is closed. Permanently. Michael's face hardened. Ellen, I think you're making a mistake. Family should be there for each other. Exactly, I said. Family should be there for each other. So where have you been for me? He couldn't answer. I want you to leave now, I said, standing up. I want you to go home and think about this conversation. Really think about it. Think about how you've treated me. Not just in the past few weeks, but for years. Sarah was sobbing now, her careful makeup streaking down her cheeks. Mom, please don't do this. We can work it out. We can, I agreed. But first, you need to understand that I'm not just Mom anymore. I'm Ellen Richardson, a person with feelings and needs and dreams and limits. And if you want to have a relationship with Ellen, you're going to have to get to know her. I know you, Sarah protested. No, I said sadly. You know the woman who gave you everything you wanted. You've never met the woman who wants things for herself. They left in angry silence, Sarah's sobs echoing in the hallway long after my door closed. I sat in my empty apartment, my heart pounding with adrenaline and terror, and something that felt surprisingly like relief. For the first time in decades, I had said no, and the world hadn't ended. The silence in my apartment after they left was different from any silence I'd ever experienced. It wasn't the hollow emptiness of loneliness. It was the profound quiet of a battlefield after the fighting has stopped, when you're still standing and realize you've survived something you weren't sure you could endure. I walked to my bathroom mirror and stared at the woman looking back at me. Her face was flushed, her silver hair slightly disheveled from running her hands through it during the confrontation. But her eyes held something I hadn't seen there in years. Power. Not the power to control others, but the power to control herself. The power to say no. The power to exist as something more than a solution to everyone else's problems. "Hello, Ellen Richardson," I whispered to my reflection. "It's nice to finally meet you." That night I slept more deeply than I had in months. No dreams about urgent phone calls or financial emergencies. No anxiety about who might need what from me tomorrow. Just the deep, restful sleep of someone who had finally put down a burden they'd been carrying for far too long. Monday morning arrived bright and cold, Chicago's November sun streaming through my kitchen window as I made coffee. Not the instant kind I'd been buying to save money for everyone else's needs, but the good coffee I'd been denying myself. I sat at my small table with Harold's list of my dreams spread before me, and for the first time in 3 years, I allowed myself to truly read it. See the northern lights in Alaska. I pulled out my laptop, an old model I'd kept functioning with prayer and careful handling because Sarah's laptop needs had always taken priority, and searched for Aurora viewing tours. The prices made me dizzy at first, the old Ellen calculating how many emergency car repairs or school fees that money could cover. But the new Ellen, the one who'd stood up in her living room yesterday and declared the ATM closed, looked at those prices differently. She saw them as investments in the dreams Harold had wanted her to pursue. She saw them as declarations of her own worth. I bookmarked 3 tour companies and promised myself I'd call them later. The phone rang at 10:30 a.m. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and my stomach automatically clenched with the old anxiety. What did she need now? What problem required my immediate attention? I let it go to voicemail. Then I did something revolutionary. I turned off my phone. For the first time in decades, I made myself unreachable. I wasn't available for emergencies, requests, or guilt trips. I was simply free. I walked to my closet and pulled out a dress I'd bought 2 years ago but had never worn. A deep blue wrap dress that brought out my eyes, that made me feel elegant instead of invisible. I'd bought it on impulse, then felt guilty about the expense when Jake needed money for summer camp. It had hung in my closet ever since, tags still attached, like evidence of my selfishness. Today, I cut off the tags and put it on. Then I did something else I hadn't done in years. I made plans that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs. The Chicago Art Institute had been on my mental list of someday activities for at least a decade. Harold and I had talked about becoming members, about spending leisurely afternoons wandering through galleries and discovering new artists. After he died, the idea had seemed too indulgent, too expensive, too frivolous when everyone around me had urgent needs. I took the bus downtown, my heart beating with the strange excitement of rebellion. I was 73 years old, and I was playing hooky from my own life. The museum was magnificent. I'd forgotten how it felt to be surrounded by beauty created for no other purpose than to inspire, to challenge, to make people feel something profound. I stood in front of a Monet water lily painting for 20 minutes. Not because I had to, not because someone was waiting for me, but because I wanted to. In the museum shop, I bought myself a small watercolor set. Nothing fancy, just basic paints and brushes and paper. $37 that would have once gone toward someone else's wish list. Harold's note had mentioned learning to paint watercolors. Maybe it wasn't too late. As I walked through Grant Park afterward, my phone still safely turned off in my purse, I noticed things I'd missed during years of hurried errands and purposeful destinations. An elderly man feeding pigeons with the patience of someone who had nowhere else to be. A young mother pushing her baby in a swing, both of them laughing at some private joke. Teenagers sitting on benches, completely absorbed in conversations that seemed to contain the entire universe. Life was happening all around me, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was part of it instead of just observing it while rushing to solve someone else's crisis. I stopped at a small cafe I'd walked past hundreds of times but never entered. The kind of place where people sat alone with books or laptops, comfortable in their own company. I ordered a cappuccino and a piece of lemon cake, both utterly unnecessary, both purely for my own enjoyment. The woman at the next table was about my age, sketching in a small notebook. Her silver hair was cut in a stylish bob, and she wore the kind of colorful scarf I'd always admired but never bought for myself. "That's beautiful," I said, nodding toward her sketch of the cafe's interior. She looked up with bright eyes. "Thank you. I'm trying to capture the way the afternoon light falls across those tables. It's different every day." We talked for an hour about art, about light, about the small pleasures of paying attention to beauty in ordinary places. Her name was Margaret, and she'd been a high school art teacher for 30 years before retiring. She told me about the watercolor class she taught at the community center, about the joy of watching adults rediscover their creativity. "You should join us," she said when I mentioned my new paint set. "Wednesdays at 2. We're a friendly group, mostly people who always wanted to paint but never gave themselves permission. People who never gave themselves permission." The phrase resonated in my chest like a bell. "I'd like that," I heard myself say. When I finally returned home that evening, my phone showed 17 missed calls and 12 text messages. The old Ellen would have felt sick with guilt, would have immediately called everyone back to apologize for being unreachable. The new Ellen made herself a cup of tea first. The messages followed a predictable pattern. Sarah's progression from confused, "Mom, are you okay?" to worried, "Mom, please call me back," to angry, "This is ridiculous, Mom. We need to talk," to manipulative, "The kids are asking where Grandma is. Emma's crying. Emma's crying." The ultimate weapon in Sarah's emotional arsenal, designed to make me feel like a monster for having needs of my own. Michael had sent one text. "Ellen, we need to discuss this situation like adults." Jake had sent, "Grandma Mom said you're mad at us, what did we do?" That last message made my heart ache. Jake was 12 years old, caught in the middle of an adult conflict he didn't understand. But even his message focused on what he might have done wrong, not on whether I was okay or what I might need. I called Sarah back. "Mom, thank God," she said before I could speak. "We've been worried sick." "Where were you? Why wasn't your phone on?" "I went to the Art Institute," I said calmly. "Then I had coffee with a new friend. My phone was off because I wanted to enjoy my day without interruption." You went to a museum?" Sarah's voice carried the bewilderment of someone trying to process unexpected information. "By yourself?" "Yes, by myself. I'm quite capable of going places alone, Sarah." "I know, but—" "Mom, we need to talk about yesterday. You said some really hurtful things." "I said some true things. That's different. You made it sound like we don't care about you at all." "When was the last time you asked about my day, Sarah? Not what I could do for you, not what you needed from me. When did you last ask what I did for fun, what I was reading, what I was thinking about?" Silence. "That's what I thought," I said gently. "You care about me as your mother, as the person who solves your problems. But you don't know me as Ellen." "That's not true. What's my favorite color?" "Blue," she said quickly. "What kind of blue?" Pause. Dark blue? It's periwinkle. Like the flowers in your grandmother's garden. I've mentioned it dozens of times over the years." "Mom, this is silly. What book am I reading right now?" "I don't know." "What did I do for my birthday this year?" Longer pause. "We sent you flowers 3 days late. And what did I do that day?" I don't know." "I sat alone in my apartment and ate grocery store cake because no one remembered it was my birthday until you saw it on Facebook's reminder list." "Mom," her voice was small now, like a child caught in a lie. "I'm not angry, Sarah. I'm sad. I'm sad that somewhere along the way, I became invisible to the people I love most. And I'm determined not to be invisible anymore." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm going to start living my own life. I'm going to take that watercolor class I signed up for today. I'm going to travel. I'm going to make friends who know me as Ellen, not as somebody's mother or grandmother." "You signed up for a class?" "I did, and I bought paints. And I'm going to learn something new because learning makes me happy. Mom, that's great. But what about us? What about the family? What about it? You'll always be my daughter, Sarah. Emma and Jake will always be my grandchildren. But I won't always be your emergency fund. I won't always be your problem solver. I won't always be available every moment of every day to meet your needs while ignoring my own. So you're just abandoning us? I'm joining us. For the first time in years, I'm going to be a full participant in this family instead of just a resource to be consumed. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with my new watercolor set spread before me. I mixed periwinkle blue with a tiny bit of white and painted a small flower on the heavy paper. It was crude, imperfect, nothing like the masterpieces I'd admired at the museum. It was also mine, created by me, for no other purpose than the joy of creating something beautiful. Harold would have loved it. Wednesday arrived with the kind of crisp November clarity that makes Chicago look like a postcard. I was standing in front of my closet, choosing between two sweaters for my first watercolor class, when the doorbell rang. Not a knock. The formal, sustained ring of someone who intended to be let in whether I wanted company or not. Through the peephole, I saw Emma standing in the hallway, her 15-year-old face streaked with tears, her school backpack slung over one shoulder. Behind her, barely visible but unmistakably present, stood Sarah's car in the parking lot. This was strategic. Send the granddaughter, the one person I'd never been able to say no to, the one whose tears had always been my Achilles heel. I opened the door. "Grandma," Emma sobbed, throwing herself into my arms before I could react. "I'm so sorry. Please don't hate us. Please don't leave us." Her small body shook against mine, and I felt the familiar tug of protective instinct, the overwhelming need to fix whatever was wrong and make her feel safe. This was how it had always worked. Their pain became my emergency. Their tears became my crisis to solve. But as I held Emma, I noticed something I'd never seen before. Over her shoulder, through the glass doors of the building's entrance, I could see Sarah in her car, talking animatedly on her phone. Not crying, not distraught, planning. "Emma, sweetheart," I said gently, guiding her inside. "What's wrong? What happened?" "Mom said you don't love us anymore," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "She said you're angry at us, and you don't want to be part of our family." I felt a familiar surge of anger, not at Emma, never at Emma, but at the manipulation she was being used to deliver. Sarah had sent her daughter to do emotional work that she herself couldn't accomplish. "Sit down, honey," I said, leading Emma to the couch. "Tell me exactly what your mom said." Emma perched on the edge of the cushion, her hands twisting in her lap. "She said you're going through some kind of phase, like a midlife crisis, but for old people. She said you're being mean to her and Dad, and that if we don't fix it, you might not help with college or anything anymore." College? Of course. Even in their manipulation, they couldn't help revealing what they were really worried about. "Emma, look at me," I said, taking her hands in mine. "Do I seem angry to you right now?" She studied my face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "No," she said slowly. "You seem different. Calmer, maybe?" "I'm not angry at you or Jake," I said. "I'm not angry at your parents either. I'm just tired of being taken for granted." "What does that mean?" I considered my words carefully. Emma was 15, old enough to understand truth, but young enough to be hurt by it. "It means that for a very long time, I've been giving everyone in our family everything they needed: money, help, support, time. But no one has been giving those things back to me. But we love you, Grandma. I know you love me, sweetheart. But love isn't just a feeling. It's also actions. And the actions I've been seeing lately tell me that I'm only valuable when I'm useful." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then she said something that broke my heart. "Is that why you won't buy me the homecoming dress? Because I didn't call you enough?" The question revealed everything. Even at 15, Emma had internalized the family's transactional approach to relationships. She understood instinctively that love in our family came with conditions and payments. "Oh, honey," I said, pulling her close again. "That's not how love works. I didn't buy you the dress because I can't afford to keep buying everyone everything they want. I have to be careful with my money because I need it for my own life. But Mom said you have lots of money from Grandpa Harold. Your mom told you about my finances? Emma nodded. She said you're just being selfish now. That you used to be generous, but now you only care about yourself. The manipulation was even worse than I'd thought. Sarah wasn't just using Emma as an emotional weapon. She was poisoning her against me, teaching her that my self-preservation was selfishness. Emma, did you know that I've never taken a real vacation in my entire adult life? She shook her head. Did you know that I sold my piano to help pay for your braces? Her mouth fell open. Did you know that I work at the church food pantry every week, serving meals to people who have even less than I do? No, she whispered. I'm not a selfish person, sweetheart. I'm a person who's finally learning that I can't take care of everyone else if I don't take care of myself first. Emma was crying again, but these tears seemed different. Less performance, more genuine confusion and pain. I don't understand why everything has to change, she said. Why can't things just go back to the way they were? Because the way they were was killing me, I thought. Because I was disappearing one favor at a time, one crisis at a time, one demand at a time. Sometimes change is scary, I said instead, but sometimes it's necessary for everyone to be healthy and happy. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. How's it going? Did she talk to you yet? So Emma had been sent on a mission. Her tears, her distress, her confusion, all of it orchestrated by adults who were too cowardly to have honest conversations themselves. Emma, I said gently, did your mom ask you to come here today? She nodded reluctantly. What did she ask you to say to me? She said to tell you that we need you, that the family isn't the same without you, that maybe if you helped with the cabin renovation, you could come visit more often. The cabin. Even now, even through Emma's innocent delivery, the message was clear. Pay up, and you can be part of the family again. And what did she say would happen if I didn't help? Emma's face crumpled. She said maybe you'd end up alone. That old people who push their families away end up in nursing homes with no visitors. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Sarah had weaponized Emma's love for me and my own fear of abandonment, creating a narrative where my self-respect was the enemy of family unity. Emma, I said, standing up and walking to my kitchen table where I'd left Margaret's contact information from the community center. I want to show you something. I picked up the small watercolor I'd painted after my first class. A simple landscape of trees reflected in water. Amateur, but heartfelt. I painted this yesterday, I said. It was my first time painting anything since high school. Emma studied the small painting with the seriousness she usually reserved for her phone screen. It's pretty, Grandma. I didn't know you could paint. I didn't either. I'm just learning. And you know what? Learning new things makes me happy. Happier than I've been in years. But you could still help us in paint too, right? The question cut straight to the heart of the matter. Even now, even after everything I'd explained, Emma couldn't imagine a world where my resources weren't primarily dedicated to their needs. Sweetheart, your parents make more money than I do. They have 2 incomes, good jobs, a beautiful house. But they've gotten used to having me pay for extras, for luxuries, for things they want but don't need. And I've gotten so used to giving that I forgot I had wants and needs too. So you're never going to help us again? I'm going to help in ways that don't hurt me. I'll babysit Jake sometimes. I'll come to your school plays. I'll listen when you need someone to talk to. But I won't give you money I can't afford to give. And I won't cancel my own plans every time someone has a crisis. Emma was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, Mom's not going to like that. I know. She's going to be really mad. I know that too. Are you scared? The question surprised me with its insight. Yes, I admitted. I'm scared. But I'm more scared of disappearing completely than I am of your mom being angry. Emma's phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, probably asking for a status report on her mission. I have to go, Emma said. Mom's waiting. As she stood to leave, she paused and looked back at me. Grandma, I do love you. Not just when you buy me things. I love you when you read me stories and when you remember my favorite cookies and when you listen to me complain about school. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you know. I wish things could be different. They can be, I said. But everyone has to want them to be different. Not just me. After Emma left, I sat in my apartment and tried to process what had just happened. Sarah had used her own daughter as an emotional weapon. had taught her that my financial independence was a threat to family harmony, had sent her to manipulate me with tears and fears. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about Sarah's determination to maintain control, to keep me in the role of grateful, giving, unquestioning mother who existed solely to serve her family's needs. My phone rang. Sarah. Mom, Emma said you had a good talk. She said you explained things better. Maybe we can work something out. No, Sarah. What do you mean, no? Emma said what she thought you wanted to hear because she's 15 years old and she's terrified that her family is falling apart. But using her to manipulate me is unconscionable. I didn't use her. She wanted to see you. You coached her on what to say. You told her I was going through a phase. You threatened me with abandonment through a child. Silence. Sarah, I'm going to say this once, and I need you to really hear it. I am not going to fund the cabin renovation. I am not going back to being your emergency bank account. I am not going to sacrifice my financial security for your convenience. Mom, please, I'm not finished. If you want to have a relationship with me, a real relationship, not just access to my money, then you need to start treating me like a person instead of a resource. You need to get to know me as Ellen, not just as Mom. And you need to stop using your children as weapons in our disagreements. You're being unreasonable. I'm being healthy. For the first time in decades, I'm being healthy. Fine, Sarah said, her voice turning cold. But don't expect us to just pretend everything's normal. Actions have consequences, Mom. Yes, I said quietly. They do. She hung up. I sat in the quiet of my apartment, Harold's photo smiling at me from the mantel, and realized that I'd just fought the most important battle of my adult life. And I'd won. Tomorrow, I would call the travel agency about Alaska. Tonight, I would paint another small watercolor, this one of a woman standing strong, finally learning that she deserved to take up space in her own life. 3 weeks passed in a silence so profound it felt like living in a different world. No urgent phone calls. No crisis texts. No unexpected visits demanding immediate solutions to problems I hadn't created. The absence of drama left space for something I'd almost forgotten existed: peace. I established new routines that belonged entirely to me. Morning coffee while reading actual books instead of skimming between interruptions. Wednesday watercolor classes with Margaret and a growing circle of women who knew me as Ellen, the one learning to paint trees. Not Ellen, the emergency fund. Afternoon walks through Lincoln Park where I fed ducks and watched children play without calculating how much their equipment cost or wondering who had paid for it. On a Thursday morning in early December, I did something that would have been unthinkable a month earlier. I walked into North Shore Travel Agency and booked a trip to Alaska. The Aurora viewing tours are best in March, explained Jennifer, the travel agent, her fingers dancing across her keyboard as she pulled up options. 7 days in Fairbanks with guaranteed viewing opportunities, dog sledding, and cultural experiences with local communities. The price made my heart race. Not with anxiety this time, but with excitement. $4,000. More than I'd ever spent on myself at one time. More than many of the individual emergencies I'd funded for my family over the years. I'll take it, I said before I could second-guess myself. Jennifer smiled with the genuine warmth of someone who recognized a significant moment when she saw one. First trip to Alaska? First trip anywhere in 20 years, that's just for me. That afternoon, I called my bank to arrange the payment and discovered something unexpected. Without the constant drain of family financial crises, my account had been slowly rebuilding itself. The automatic deposits from my small pension and Social Security had been accumulating instead of disappearing, creating a modest cushion I hadn't seen in years. For the first time since Harold's death, I felt financially secure instead of constantly anxious about the next request. My watercolor skills were improving week by week. What had started as therapeutic distraction was becoming genuine passion. Margaret had introduced me to plein air painting, setting up easels outdoors to capture landscapes in natural light. The first time I successfully painted the way morning sun filtered through bare winter branches, I actually cried with the joy of creation. "You have a natural eye for light," Margaret told me as we packed up our supplies after a session in Millennium Park. Have you considered entering the community center's art show in the spring? The idea of displaying my work publicly would have terrified the old Ellen. But this Ellen, the one who'd learned to say no, who'd booked a trip to Alaska, who'd stopped apologizing for existing, felt a flutter of possibility instead of fear. I'd like that, I said. At the grocery store, I noticed changes in how I shopped. Instead of buying family pack sizes out of habit, I chose portions appropriate for one person. Instead of generic brands bought to save money for other people's needs, I occasionally splurged on ingredients that made cooking feel like pleasure instead of obligation. I bought expensive olive oil, real vanilla extract, the good cheese I'd always walked past while calculating how many school fees it represented. One evening, while trying a new recipe for lemon risotto, something I'd never made because Sarah claimed she didn't like lemon, my doorbell rang. Jake stood in the hallway, but this time he was alone. No strategic coaching from Sarah, no tears or elaborate emotional presentations, just my 12-year-old grandson, shifting his weight from foot to foot and looking genuinely nervous. "Hi, Grandma," he said quietly. "Hi, sweetheart. Come in." He sat on my couch with the careful posture of someone trying to be on his best behavior. "Mom doesn't know I'm here," he said. "I rode my bike. That's a long ride from your house." "Yeah, but I wanted to see you, and I wanted to ask you something." I sat across from him, struck by how much he'd grown in just the few weeks since I'd last seen him. When had he gotten so tall? When had his voice started changing? "What did you want to ask? Are you really never going to help us again? Like ever?" The question was asked without manipulation, without tears, just genuine curiosity from a child trying to understand a confusing adult situation. "Jake, do you remember when you were little and you wanted that expensive remote control car for Christmas?" He nodded. "And I couldn't afford it, so you saved your allowance for 6 months to buy it yourself?" "Yeah." "How did it feel when you finally got it?" "Really good. Like I'd earned it." That's how I want you to feel about the things you get in life. Like you've earned them. Not like someone else has to sacrifice to give them to you. Jake was quiet, processing this. Then he said, "But sometimes kids need help." "You're absolutely right. And I'll always help you when you truly need it. If you're sick, if you're in danger, if you need someone to talk to or somewhere to feel safe. But I won't buy you video games or expensive toys anymore." "What about college?" The question surprised me with its practicality. "What about it?" "Mom said you won't help with college now." I looked at this boy, this almost teenager who was already worrying about college financing, and felt a familiar surge of anger at Sarah for burdening him with these concerns. "Jake, college is 6 years away for you. That's 6 years for your parents to save money, 6 years for you to earn scholarships, 6 years to figure out solutions that don't involve spending all of my money. So you might help?" "I might. If your parents show me that they've also been helping, if you work hard and earn scholarships, if everyone in the family starts treating each other better." He nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to him. "Grandma, can I tell you something?" "Of course. Sometimes I felt bad when you bought me stuff, like I didn't deserve it or something, like maybe you couldn't afford it but you bought it anyway." The honesty of it took my breath away. Even at 12, Jake had sensed the sacrificial nature of my giving, had felt the weight of my financial strain even when the adults in his life ignored it. "You're a very wise young man," I told him. "Can I come visit you sometimes? Just to hang out? Not to ask for anything?" "I would love that more than you know." Jake stayed for dinner, the lemon risotto, which he pronounced weird but good, and told me about school, his friends, a book he was reading about space exploration. We talked for 2 hours without anyone needing anything from anyone else, just grandmother and grandson enjoying each other's company. As I watched him ride his bike home in the gathering dusk, I realized this was the first real conversation I'd had with Jake in years. All our previous interactions had been filtered through crises and requests, transactions disguised as relationships. This felt like the beginning of something genuine. December progressed with a lightness I'd forgotten was possible. Christmas approached without the usual anxiety about how much to spend, what to buy, how to manage everyone's expectations. For the first time in my adult life, I planned a Christmas that suited my budget and my desires. I sent thoughtful but modest gifts, books for the grandchildren, homemade cookies in decorated tins, a small watercolor painting I'd made for Sarah and Michael. The painting showed our old house in spring, when the apple tree in the front yard bloomed with such abundance that petals covered the walk like snow. I'd painted it from memory, thinking about the woman I'd been when Sarah was young, when hope felt infinite and sacrifice felt like love instead of self-destruction. Sarah called on Christmas Eve. "Mom, thank you for the painting," she said, her voice carefully neutral. It's beautiful. I forgot how pretty that tree was. I painted it from memory. I was thinking about when you were little, how you used to climb that tree every spring. I remember." Her voice softened slightly. Michael hung it in the kitchen. "I'm glad you like it." Silence stretched between us, filled with everything we weren't saying. "Mom, I want you to know, Emma and Jake miss you. They ask about you all the time. I miss them too. Jake told me he came to see you, that you had dinner together. We did. It was lovely. He said you explained things to him, about boundaries and earning things." She paused. "Maybe you were right about some things. Maybe." It wasn't the full acknowledgement I'd hoped for, but it was something. "I'd like the kids to be able to visit you sometimes," Sarah continued. "If you want that. I want that very much. And maybe we could try to do better, as a family. Try to be more aware of each other's needs. I'd like that too." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, surrounded by the modest Christmas decorations I'd bought for myself. A small tree with lights that cast rainbow patterns on the walls, stockings I'd hung just because they made me smile, cookies I'd baked because I loved the smell of cinnamon and vanilla filling my space. This was what peace looked like. A life size to fit my actual needs instead of everyone else's wants. Outside my window, Chicago's Christmas lights twinkled like earthbound stars, and I thought about the aurora borealis I'd see in Alaska in 3 months. Harold's dream for me, finally becoming reality. I pulled out my easel and began a new painting. A woman standing at a window, her face turned toward distant light, her posture confident and hopeful. Ellen Richardson, learning to take up space in her own life. Ellen Richardson, who'd discovered that choosing herself hadn't destroyed her family, it had saved her from disappearing into it. Ellen Richardson, who was finally, beautifully, free. 6 months later, I stood in a snow-covered field outside Fairbanks, Alaska, my breath forming clouds in the -20 air, watching the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen dance across the star-filled sky. The aurora borealis moved like living silk, waves of green and purple light that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the universe itself. Around me, other travelers gasped and pointed, their excitement infectious. But I stood in reverent silence, thinking about Harold. "You were right," I whispered to the stars. This was worth waiting for. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't just about the northern lights. The real aurora had been happening inside me for months. The slow, magnificent awakening of a woman who'd forgotten she was allowed to exist for her own sake. The journey to Alaska had been everything I'd dreamed and more. 7 days of wonder without a single crisis phone call, without anyone needing anything from me except my presence in my own life. I'd ridden behind a team of huskies across frozen wilderness, their joy in running so pure it brought tears to my eyes. I'd learned about indigenous culture from people who understood the sacred balance between giving and receiving, between community and self-preservation. Most importantly, I'd proven to myself that Ellen Richardson could travel alone, navigate unfamiliar places, make decisions without consulting anyone else's needs or opinions. I could exist independently, fully, without apology. The painting I'd made of the aurora on my last night in Fairbanks now hung in my Chicago apartment, a reminder that beauty exists in the world for those brave enough to seek it out. It wasn't technically perfect. My watercolor skills were still developing, but it captured something more valuable than technical precision. It captured the moment a 73-year-old woman remembered how to dream. Spring had brought other changes. The community center art show Margaret had mentioned became reality. I submitted 3 paintings: the aurora, the winter trees from Lincoln Park, and one I'd titled Invisible Woman, a portrait of someone fading into the background of her own life, barely visible against the overwhelming needs of others. To my amazement, Invisible Woman won second place in the amateur division. The small ribbon and certificate now held places of honor on my refrigerator, next to Jake's latest school photo and a postcard Emma had sent me from a school trip to Springfield. More importantly, the painting had sparked conversations. Other women approached me at the reception, sharing their own stories of disappearing into their family's needs, of forgetting that they were people worthy of care and attention. I'd inadvertently become part of a community of women learning to reclaim themselves. "You put into paint what I've been feeling for 20 years, one woman told me, tears in her eyes as she studied my work. I didn't know other people felt invisible too. Sarah and I had settled into a new pattern of relationship, cautious but increasingly genuine. She visited me now instead of just calling when she needed something. Sometimes she brought Emma and Jake, sometimes she came alone. We talked about her work, my painting, memories of Harold, current events, conversations that existed for their own sake rather than as preludes to requests. The requests had slowed to a trickle and changed in nature. When Emma needed a ride to a friend's house because Sarah was working late, she asked politely, and accepted gracefully when I couldn't help. When Jake wanted to show me a project he was working on for school, he called just to share his excitement, not to ask for funding. Most significantly, Sarah had stopped presenting their wants as my emergencies. The cabin renovation had happened without my money. They'd taken out a loan, which seemed to me like what responsible adults should do when they wanted to improve property they owned. "I think it's better this way," Sarah admitted during one of our coffee dates in April. "Michael and I had to really think about what we wanted versus what we needed. We ended up making different choices." Different choices. The phrase resonated with me because I'd been making different choices too, and each one led to discoveries about who Ellen Richardson actually was beneath decades of self-sacrifice. I'd discovered I loved live theater and had subscribed to a small company season. I'd discovered I was good at making friends and had joined a book club where passionate discussions about literature replaced anxious conversations about family crises. I'd discovered I enjoyed cooking for myself and had stopped viewing solo meals as evidence of loneliness. Most surprisingly, I'd discovered I was attractive to other people. Not romantically, necessarily, but as someone worth knowing. Margaret had become a genuine friend who valued my opinions and sought my company. The women in my art group looked forward to my arrival each week. The volunteers at the church food pantry had noticed my renewed energy and asked me to help train new volunteers. People saw me now, the real me, not just the function I performed in other people's lives. On a warm May evening, I was in my apartment putting finishing touches on a painting of Lake Michigan at sunset when my phone rang. Emma's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, Grandma," she said, her voice bright with excitement. "I have news. Tell me everything. I got into the National Honor Society, and I wanted you to be the first person I told because you always believed I was smart even when I was being kind of awful to you." The honesty in her voice made my chest tight with emotion. "I always knew you were smart, sweetheart, and kind, and capable of amazing things. I'm sorry about before. About how we treated you. I understand better now." "What do you understand?" "That you're not just my grandma. You're Ellen, and Ellen deserves to have her own life and her own dreams." She paused. "I want to be like you when I'm older. I want to be brave enough to choose myself sometimes." After we hung up, I sat in the golden light of my living room, surrounded by evidence of the life I'd built for myself. Paintings on easels, books I'd chosen based on my own interests, furniture arranged to please my own aesthetic preferences, a calendar marked with my own appointments, art classes, book club meetings, a weekend trip to Wisconsin planned with Margaret. This was what freedom looked like. Not the absence of love or family, but the presence of choice. The ability to say yes from desire rather than obligation. To say no without guilt. To exist as a complete person rather than just a supporting character in everyone else's story. I thought about the woman who'd sat in this same apartment 8 months ago, signing away her last piece of independence because she was too afraid of being called difficult to protect her own interests. That woman had been dying slowly, disappearing one sacrifice at a time, one surrendered dream at a time. This woman, the one who'd chased the aurora borealis across Alaska, who'd learned to paint light and shadow, who'd set boundaries and discovered that love could coexist with limits. This woman was vibrantly, unapologetically alive. The difference wasn't just in what I'd stopped doing for others. It was in what I'd started doing for myself. I'd stopped funding everyone else's dreams and started pursuing my own. I'd stopped accepting scraps of attention and started demanding genuine relationship. I'd stopped apologizing for existing and started celebrating the space I took up in the world. Harold's list of my dreams, now framed and hanging in my bedroom, was slowly being checked off. Alaska, done. Watercolor painting, in progress. The antique rocking chair from Miller's shop, purchased and placed by my window where I could watch the seasons change while reading books I chose for myself. Some items remained: the cooking class in Tuscany, the Shakespeare Festival in Stratford, the letters to future great-grandchildren. But now these felt like promises to myself rather than impossible fantasies. They felt achievable because I'd learned the most important lesson of my 73 years. I was worth the investment. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was still 73, still silver-haired, still bearing the physical marks of a long life lived in service to others. But her eyes held something that hadn't been there 8 months ago. Light. The kind of inner radiance that comes from knowing your own worth, from choosing your own path, from refusing to disappear into other people's needs. I thought about all the women who might be listening to this story, sitting in their own apartments or houses, wondering if it was too late to choose themselves. Women who'd spent decades being everything to everyone else, and had forgotten they were someone too. It's not too late. It's never too late to remember that you matter. Not just as a mother or wife or grandmother, but as yourself. It's never too late to set boundaries, to pursue dreams, to demand that your family see you as a person instead of a resource. The people who truly love you will adjust to your newfound self-respect. They'll learn to value you for who you are, rather than what you provide. And the ones who can't make that adjustment, their departure will make room for relationships built on genuine care, rather than convenient utility. You don't have to disappear into other people's lives. You don't have to earn love through endless giving. You don't have to apologize for taking up space in your own existence. You can chase your own northern lights. You can choose yourself. And when you do, you might discover what I learned in that frozen field in Alaska, watching impossible beauty dance across the sky. The most magnificent light of all is the one that's been waiting inside you all along, just needing permission to shine. Have you ever felt like you were disappearing into other people's needs? Like your own dreams didn't matter as much as everyone else's emergencies? Do you know someone who's been giving so much of themselves that there's barely anything left? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if this message resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones about ordinary people finding the courage to choose themselves. Let's make sure this message reaches someone who needs to hear it today.